This is Bashing doing an interview on Aero or AeroRG. It's known in Discord. I just want to say thank you for making the time for this interview, and I really appreciate it. Last time we spoke, it was actually during the Zuljan Distillery Invitational, and we played against each other in the finals for that. How has NGS, I guess, as a player, gone since then, and as a caster too?
So that's actually been a while. That's been like, I don't know, 2 seasons or so.
Yeah,
Um, so it's been quite a while. It's I've done a lot of casting in general. Last season, I scaled back a little bit of my casting. Just had a lot going on. I moved personally, and my business kind of blew up. So I scaled back for the last season. But casting is just so much fun that I think the prior season was my biggest at 120 something cast. So it's a lot of fun. I love doing it. And my team, we bumped up divisions and got to try out some new things. So looking forward to the next season and what's to come.
you guys were in Division A last season.
Yeah, so we bumped up from B to A last season. It was a little bit of a challenge for us. We're kind of uh, this was at the beginning of when COVID was all coming into play, and so there was a lot of stress and things going on for the team to have to deal with. So it was a little bit of a challenge for us to go into a higher division, a higher challenge with all that other stuff going on. So it was we didn't do too great in that season, but we've definitely learned a lot and looking forward to going forward and learning more.
Right on. Yeah, no, I feel about the being bumped up. The season before, when I was on Takomi Tassor, we actually got moved to A. We probably should have been a B team because we did pretty bad in Division A ourselves. Anyways, so I love talking about the past, but this interview is about he's a caster, so we're gonna try to focus on that. What got you into casting? Let's start there.
I think it was really being a part of the regen organization. I had seen, obviously Murda had done a lot of casting and Mongoose and Jason had done a fair bit at that point as well. And seeing what they did for not only the region teams but for other teams in NGS, and the quality content that was put out and encouraging other people within the organization like Recyclic and Ragnarok at the time to get into casting really gave me the idea that, hey, maybe this is something I should try out and see if I enjoy it. And and I remember I was checking out a replay for you know team exercise stuff at that point and just decided, what, I'm just going to start talking over this and see how that goes, and if it's something that kind of flows well or if it's a challenge. And tried it out for a couple minutes and I stopped and I was like, wow, actually, I think that actually went pretty well overall. And been doing it ever since.
Was there any caster that you looked up to when you first started?
Yeah, definitely. Like Murda was for me the clear, icon. Um, uh, Certainly partially because of the fact that I had a direct connection with him because of the regen organization. But just because he's also, you know, really hype filled, does a fantastic job. And of course, I mean, I can't remember. I think this was before HGC kind of blew up that I kind of got started in it. Of course, being able to watch some of those caster icons of HGC gave me the idea that, hey, maybe this is something that who knows, at some point maybe this becomes a thing I could do more regularly.
So, would you say you had a favorite caster then, or could you actually pick out your favorite HGC caster if that's easier?
So so for HGC, my favorite was Caldor, which is kind of funny because at times he can, definitely these days he can be pretty mean. But and I don't think it's just because I kind of identify with him having, the shaved head that he also has. But just his presence with Trixler in the EU casting, I always found to be an enjoyable show. I really enjoyed the EU casting much more than the others, primarily because of that. But when we're talking local, I mean, again, Murda really brought a lot to that with his overall presence and his quality of his streams.
Do you try to emulate any of that in your casting at all?
Certainly at the beginning, I tried to think of, I tried to match up and be a little bit more hype filled than I normally am. Um, and so certainly some of that. Um, I Over time, I've definitely kind of created my own style, as I think anybody certainly does. But anytime I see, what other folks are doing, and I try to incorporate things that I enjoyed in the cast to try to make that something that my viewers can enjoy as well. And sometimes that means that I have third party interruptions like Alice there.
So that's great. You've actually taken parts of, I guess, what's going on around you, made it part of your cast. I know that in your streams that you have a point system where I think you can redeem them for, I think, a view of the dog. If I remember that right, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I have a few of the channel points bonuses, and the dogs are two of them. Alpha and Alice are two of the redemptions there because people they like to see the dogs, right? And Bahamut certainly has his bandit cam, and everybody loves bandit time and all that stuff. And I've definitely got some ideas on things after my move on ways that I can incorporate the dogs a little bit more into my stream. But I also one of the things that I did, and I don't know if anybody else is doing this, if they are doing it now, or if I'm the only one who does it. But one of the things that I set up was to do replay casts through channel points. And at the time, I set that way too low, but it is something that I think encourages not only people to watch, but it also encourages people, if they've got a cast, especially an NGS cast that, they couldn't get cast live, gives them the opportunity then to convert that into at least a show that they can enjoy.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed, at least in the community, where you watch kind of what you watch, like your team plays, and you get casted. That's what you watch, right? Because I mean, who would want to watch themselves play? It's pretty cool, but at the same time, it's kind of disservice to a caster because you don't get as many views because oh well, I'm really not interested in like if I'm a Div C player, I'm not really interested in Div A, right? So I can see that.
I've definitely experienced that. I mean, you can definitely see that with some teams and some divisions. But I have found that and I've seen it, especially the difference between season 8 and season 9, where I cast 120 something casts versus like 20 casts. If you are consistent and you're casting a lot, and everybody knows who you are, and you're posting reminders and getting a bunch of people following you and all that stuff. And I think this will only increase with Storm Division. Um, People show up, and if you're doing kind of a one-off thing, you might see 10 to 20 people show up, maybe the teams and their friends or what have you, their family. But when you're doing it more consistently, it was not uncommon to see 30 to 60 or even 70 people show up for a match that was just a regular match, not a playoff match or what have you, just a Div B matchup between two teams. And it's because in those divisions, especially, and I think especially like Div C is very integrated with all of their teams. I think Div A maybe a little bit more for scouting purposes, probably heroic as well. They tend to want to see those games and interact with the caster and the other players.
So I guess speaking on that is you say it's more of a I guess it's more of a community doing things then, right? Because that's what NGS is, right? It's a community. So as a community, you're seeing it grow, but only because the caster has put in, I guess, more effort in order to get the views.
Well, I certainly wouldn't say only, but I think that if you are a caster who's consistently casting, and by consistently I mean you have to cast at least a few games a week. One or two probably isn't enough, but if you're casting, 3, 4, or 5 games a week, people are going to show up to your streams and then they're going to watch the next stream. And yes, NGS is a great community and people are interacting with others in their division. But the caster is kind of the catalyst to allow for that community to happen. and because otherwise you just can't watch those games, right? So if a lot of people are watching the games because they're in them, because other people in their divisions are in them, um, then they're going to show up on a regular basis.
Right. So speaking of, I guess, from a newcaster standpoint, or not even as a newcaster standpoint, but how did your first cast go? Like, do you remember which teams you casted?
Yes, actually, I do. I was a co-caster with Jason, and I definitely wanted to co-cast first just to kind of see how it went. And I was casting. It was a Div A, and it was Queen's Consorts versus Give Me the D Shield.
That was my team.
There you go.
Oh my, we lost so hard.
Yeah, yeah. And there was a sub healer. I think that was Butte Holiday's one match for the
Yep.
season, and it was interesting. But it went well. Now, my first official cast did not go so well. It was a match that did not get picked up until kind of last minute, and I said, "Listen, it was a couple of Div D teams. I want to say that it was Wraithling's team. I'm not positive of that, but it was a matchup where I screwed up. And it's easy to do, but I'd followed the guide and I had done some things. Shout out to Tootie because he put together a wonderful guide. But I had done some things and accidentally he had a panic button hotkey, which basically took you off your screen and put you on a pause screen, basically. And I accidentally found out that uh, if you tie that hotkey to one of your number pad keys and you're using your number pad for other things, uh, it'll still use it even if it's not that the focus. So there was 8 minutes of a Towers of Doom game that just got lost because I didn't notice that I had gone to this other screen, which is unfortunate. And I came back and I was, obviously I was embarrassed and I felt so bad for the teams, but everybody was really great about it. And, they all knew it was my first cast too.
I was going to ask you, what lessons have you learned since but you got it.
That was the big one. I mean, there are other lessons that I've picked up. Probably the most common one that I have to remember to do now is when I change my sound between my speakers and my headset, for example, the broadcast software sometimes will switch the sound to default. So I have to make sure every time I cast that the outbound sound is to the right setting, that the inbound sound is to the right setting. Otherwise, people can't hear people, right? You can't hear the co-caster, you can't hear the game, or you can't hear me. And it takes a little bit to find that one out. But of course, another scenario that is a little bit embarrassing. Those are probably the two most important things that I found was, being careful about setting up hotkeys and making sure that your settings are correct before you start.
So what else do you do to get ready for a cast aside from making sure that your buttons are set?
So overall, I tend to take about an hour roughly to make sure that I've got everything set up, and that includes setting up for which teams are playing, making sure that I've got the heroes, or sorry, rather the players set up in the software, the Soothsayer software that Falendrith has put together. Absolutely fantastic. Making sure that like if it's a playoff match or something like that, that the standings are set, that I've got the brackets all set up correctly and all that, so that in general, I can put together a good show. I don't tend to do at this point a whole lot of team research. I definitely did do that early on because it gave me something more to talk about. But depending on how many games you're casting, if you're doing a doubleheader, it's a lot to try to put in, and that changes an hour of prep work to several hours of prep work. And if you're doing 3 4 5 casts a week, several hours of prep work turns into a part-time job.
So would you do that amount of prep work for like a playoff game versus a regular season?
So generally speaking, like when we start getting in deeper into the playoffs and all that stuff, obviously you want to know more about the teams. You're probably also not casting nearly as many because there aren't as many games. But you also may know the teams just because you may have cast them previously. And so absolutely. I mean, it's not a big deal to take some time, look through some heroes profile, maybe even at times watch some of the prior games, just to kind of see what they've done and have some insight into the teams that you're about to cast, and that way you can kind of highlight some of those moments and some of the opportunities that you could see maybe in a draft, or call out something that's unique if if they've never played the Lost Vikings and now all of a sudden here's the Lost Vikings, then that's a big deal. And identifying that uh, gives the opportunity to communicate to the viewers that this is a big deal. This isn't something you see every day.
I was going to say, I mean, it would really help cut out the white noise. That, or yeah, I think you refer to as white noise when there's like downtime.
Yeah. So the downtime, the dead air, right? The dead space
Yeah.
is critical to just make sure you cut that out. And it's always like my kind of go-to is oftentimes to talk about maybe talents, or if a team's behind, what can they do to catch up, or if a team's ahead, what opportunity are they looking for to close out a game. There's so many things that you can talk about while the game is active, um, that it's really like those points are oftentimes like the research points are oftentimes for kind of the pregame show. And I know like Murda does a couple of minutes break in between matches. And that kind of helps to alleviate the dead space too, right? If you're not having to worry about that.
So aside from Dead Space, I mean, what else could you tell like a new caster?
So for Newcaster, obviously the dead space is the key. Always have something in mind that you want to talk about. Um, and you can be wrong. That's okay. You don't have to be right about everything. Don't worry, Twitch chat will make sure that you're aware that you're wrong. But the reality is that people want to have something that they can listen to. They want to have feedback that they can respond to. Not everybody maybe is able to watch the game. Sometimes, like I've had games where I'll be driving someplace and I'll have it plugged into my car and just listening to the game. So being able to listen to some of the things, you know, and constantly being aware of what's going on is important. Um, I like to acknowledge the players. I don't do it all of the time. You know, sometimes I'll say, "Hey, this is Imperius," and then I'll say the next time it'll be okay. Well, they're chasing down, Fury in the case of tonight. But acknowledging the player names, because when you say the player's name, when they come back and watch that later, because I've had this experience myself, it feels good, right? You know that they're talking about you as opposed to just the Imperius player. Um, and what else would there be? Try to be a little bit prepared. And if you're fairly new, have a co-caster. I can't stress that enough. You may not always be in a position where you and your co-caster are in sync, and you probably won't be at the beginning, but it helps to minimize that dead space, but it also brings a different perspective. It also gives a second person who can be looking for those moments that you might be missing. You may be watching a fight, a team fight, in the bot lane, but in the top lane, there's this epic 1v1 battle that's about to end in, just this absolutely cinematic way. And your co-caster can help to identify those moments because they don't have to necessarily always look at the same screen. And so they can very easily slide in and say, "Hey, but if you take a look up top, we've got this happening."
So the co-caster, I mean, you started out as co-casters. Would you say that's a pretty good route for someone to start as a caster?
So I only did one co-cast before I jumped right into casting, but I think it definitely helps to kind of feel your way through without the distraction of having to run the show, run all of the OBS software or whatever streaming software you're using to run the camera, all of those things. Having the opportunity to see the game and talk about the game, and for what it's worth, have a visual record that you can go back and look at yourself and say, "Oh, okay, so this is the cast that I watched, and here's the perspective that I get from who was actually leading the show, so to speak. And how did I do? How did I respond to them?" And look for feedback. One of the things that kind of got me interested initially was Ragnarok from Regen at the time was asking for feedback, And so kind of talking with him about things that he did and how I felt about them and ideas on how to make things, exciting or different perspectives and things like that. Did he use my ideas? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and that's totally fine. But it gave me the ideas of how would I do this as a caster in reverse of me watching it as a player or as a viewer.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I guess staying on that perspective note, so you were not coach, you were the head caster for I think a season or two. How did that change your approach to casting?
So yeah, so that was for one full season in season 8. And there's a lot that goes into casting. There's a lot more that goes into being the head caster, trying to coordinate for teams, trying to coordinate for casters, and making sure that everybody's, I don't want to say necessarily following the rules, because I think that in general most casters do that, but making sure that everybody's at least maintaining a certain level of decorum and all that stuff. From an individual perspective, I don't think it changed too much on how I cast per se, but I definitely have a lot of respect for the people who've been in that position, who have to do that leadership role, and understanding that when you've got 20 or 25 or 30 people, however many casters we may have throughout a season, that they all have their different way of doing things, and they all have a different way of how they want to do it, right? Of their own interpretation of how they want to run a show. And for some people, their show's going to look very different. A Bahamut cast is very different from a Murda cast. They're both great casts, but they have a different backbone in their structure and how they run. And that's okay for other people too. Some people are going to be more relaxed and just simply enjoying their time. And I think the bottom line is that for teams, when they cast, they just want to be able to see themselves on the screen, hear, be acknowledged by the caster when they make some good plays, and hopefully be acknowledged by Twitch chat too, and hopefully not too much, BM.
Yeah, yeah. But what would you say the hardest part of being the head caster?
The hardest part for being headcaster, I think, was really just the amount of like mundane duties that there are, making sure that the cast replays are posted, and making sure that people are reporting their casts, and that's surprisingly harder than you think it might have to be. But there was a lot of opportunities to kind of develop things and make things better as a whole, and I think Smiley did a great job last season doing that in many ways. And the hardest part is just kind of the paperwork, if you will. Obviously none of it's paper, but those things that are data entry and mundane and just difficult to get through because you have to, as opposed to because you enjoy it.
Awesome. Well, that's all the questions I have, Aero. I really appreciate it. That's actually some cool insight, and I never would have known half the things had I not had this interview with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me here. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to season 10 and all the things that NGS has going for it this season.